December 24th, 1971. Christmas Eve. A 17-year-old girl is strapped into her seat on Lanza Flight 508, flying over the endless green ocean of the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. In just moments, her entire world will shatter, literally sending her plummeting 2 miles through the sky, still buckled to her seat. But here's what makes this story absolutely unbelievable. She survives the fall, and that's where her nightmare truly begins. What follows is 11 days of hell, injured, alone, and lost in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. This is the true story of Julianne Köpke, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this is called the most miraculous survival story of the 20th century. But before we dive in, let me ask you something. What would you do if you woke up in the middle of the Amazon jungle with a broken collarbone, a gashed arm, and maggots crawling in your wounds? Think about that as we go through this story. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because this channel is all about the most incredible true stories that push the limits of human survival. To understand how Julianne survived what no one else could, you need to know who she was before that fateful day. Julianne Köpke wasn't your typical teenager. She was born in Lima, Peru, in 1954 to 2 German zoologists, Hans Wilhelm and Maria Köpke. But Julianne didn't grow up in the city. No, her childhood was spent in the Amazon rainforest at Panguana, a remote research station her parents founded. While other kids were playing with dolls and watching TV, Julianne was learning how to identify venomous snakes, which insects were safe to eat, and how to navigate the jungle using rivers. Her parents were strict scientists, and they raised their daughter with an intimate knowledge of the rainforest, the very place that would one day become both her prison and her salvation. By 1971, Julianne had moved to Lima to finish her final year of high school. She lived with her mother, Maria, while her father stayed at the research station. The plan was simple. After Julianne graduated, they would both return to Panguana for Christmas. But there was a problem. On December 19th, Julianne's graduation ceremony ran late, much later than expected. By the time it ended, they had missed their scheduled flight to Pucallpa, the nearest city to Panguana. The next available flight? December 24th. Christmas Eve. Maria was anxious to get back to her husband. When she learned there was one flight leaving that afternoon, Lanza Flight 508, she insisted they take it, even though the weather forecast predicted severe thunderstorms along their route. Julianne pleaded with her mother to wait for the next day, but Maria wouldn't budge. They boarded the plane. Looking back, Julianne would later say she had a terrible feeling that day, a sense of dread she couldn't shake. She took the window seat. Her mother sat in the middle. Flight 508 was a Lockheed L-188, a Electra turboprop, a workhorse plane carrying 86 passengers and 6 crew members. As it lifted off from Lima's runway, Julianne looked out at the sprawling city below, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see civilization for 11 days. For the first 25 minutes, everything was fine. The plane climbed to cruising altitude and passengers settled in. Some read newspapers, others dozed off. Julianne looked out her window at the endless carpet of green jungle below. Then, without warning, they entered the storm. The turbulence hit like a sledgehammer. The plane bucked and shook violently. Passengers screamed. Luggage tumbled from overhead compartments. Outside Julianne's window, the world turned dark gray. Thick, angry clouds swallowed them whole. That's when she saw the lights. First, a soft glow on the wing, what she would later describe as St. Elmo's fire, a luminous plasma phenomenon. Then came the engines. They began glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Julianne turned to her mother. She was about to say something when a blinding flash, a deafening explosion. The plane lurched violently to the right. They'd been struck by lightning. For a few seconds, everything went quiet. That strange, surreal silence you get right before disaster. Passengers looked at each other with wide, terrified eyes. Someone screamed. Then the plane started to fall. Not gently, not in a controlled descent. The aircraft was breaking apart mid-air, ripping itself to pieces as it spiraled downward. Metal screeched. Wind roared through gaping holes in the fuselage. People were screaming, crying, praying. Julianne clutched her mother's hand. She remembers that moment vividly, looking at her mother one last time. Then, in an instant, Maria's hand slipped away. The next thing Julianne knew, she was falling. Not just falling, hurtling through the sky at terminal velocity, still strapped to her seat, which was somehow still attached to the two seats beside her. The wind roared in her ears. The green jungle rushed up to meet her. She was falling from 10,000 feet, 2 miles of empty air between her and the ground. In those moments, Julianne didn't scream. She didn't panic. Years later, she would say she simply thought, "This is the end." But then something extraordinary happened. The row of 3 seats, with Julianne still buckled in, began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, creating a helicopter-like rotation that slowed her descent just enough. The thick jungle canopy below acted like a series of giant cushions, with vines, branches, and leaves breaking her fall layer by layer. And then, darkness. When Julianne opened her eyes, she thought she was dead. It was the next morning, Christmas Day. She was lying on the jungle floor, still strapped to her seat. The 2 seats that had been attached to hers were gone. Above her, a small shaft of light filtered through the canopy where she had punched through the trees. For a moment, she just lay there, trying to understand what had happened. Then the pain hit. Her right arm was deeply gashed, bleeding through her torn shirt. Her collarbone was broken. Her right eye was swollen shut. She later discovered she had a concussion, multiple lacerations, and her leg was injured. But incredibly, impossibly, she was alive. Julianne called out for her mother. "Mama! Mama!" Silence. Only the sounds of the jungle, insects buzzing, birds calling, the rustle of leaves. She unbuckled her seatbelt and tried to stand. Every movement sent waves of agony through her body, but she managed to get to her feet. Looking around, she saw pieces of wreckage scattered through the trees, twisted metal, shredded luggage, Christmas presents torn open and strewn across the forest floor. But no people, no survivors, no bodies. Julianne was completely, utterly alone. Now here's where most people would have given up. Injured, in shock, surrounded by one of the most hostile environments on Earth, the Amazon rainforest, where jaguars hunt, poisonous snakes slither through every shadow, and a single infected cut can kill you. But Julianne had something most crash survivors don't have: knowledge. She remembered what her father taught her. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find water. Follow it downstream. All rivers lead to civilization. But first, she needed to find the wreckage, the main crash site. Maybe her mother was there. Maybe there were other survivors. She spent that entire first day searching, calling out for her mother, stumbling through dense vegetation. She found nothing. As night fell, the jungle came alive with sounds. The roar of howler monkeys, the screech of birds, strange rustling in the undergrowth. Julianne curled up at the base of a tree, shivering in her torn sleeveless dress, the only clothing she had. She had lost one sandal in the fall. No food, no water, no shelter, and the worst part? She could hear the helicopters. The search and rescue planes were flying overhead, but they couldn't see her through the thick canopy. She screamed and waved her arms, but it was useless. The jungle had swallowed her whole. On the second day, Julianne's injuries began to worsen. Her right arm was infected. The gash was deep, and in the humid jungle, infection spreads fast. But she kept walking, kept searching. That's when she found it. A small stream, barely more than a trickle. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Follow the water." So she did. Walking through the Amazon rainforest is nothing like hiking through a normal forest. The jungle is alive and it's trying to kill you. Every step is a battle. Thorny vines tear at your skin. The ground is a treacherous mix of mud, hidden holes, and rotting vegetation. Insects swarm around you in clouds. The heat is suffocating, the humidity so thick you can barely breathe. And Julianne was doing all of this with a broken collarbone, a mangled arm, one sandal, and a dress that was falling apart. But she kept walking, following that little stream as it gradually widened into a creek. For 3 days, she walked during daylight and slept fitfully at night. She had no food except for a small bag of candy she'd found in the wreckage. She tried to stay hydrated by drinking from the stream, though she knew it was risky. On the 4th day, she made a discovery that would haunt her forever. She smelled it first, the sweet, sickly smell of death. Following her nose, she found a row of 3 seats, still attached to each other, embedded upside down in the ground. And in those seats were 3 bodies, a woman and 2 men, still strapped in. Julianne approached cautiously. She recognized one of them. They had been on her flight. The woman's legs were pointing upward, her body grotesquely twisted. The scene was so surreal that Julianne's brain could barely process it. She wanted to check if anyone was alive, but one look told her everything. These people had been dead since the crash. She searched around them for supplies, anything useful, but found nothing. With tears streaming down her face, Julianne whispered a prayer and continued downstream. This moment broke something inside her. The reality of what had happened finally sank in. Her mother was gone. 91 people were dead, and she was utterly, completely alone. But giving up wasn't an option. Her father was out there somewhere, waiting for them to arrive. She had to survive, for him. By day 5, her arm was getting worse. The wound had become infected, and now maggots had burrowed into the gash. She could feel them moving under her skin. It was horrifying, disgusting, and potentially life-threatening. She tried to pick them out with her fingers, but they were too deep. The pain was unbearable, and the jungle kept throwing obstacles at her. She had to wade through waist-deep water, dodge massive spiders, and navigate around poisonous snakes. At night, the mosquitoes were relentless, covering every inch of exposed skin. Her face swelled up from the bites. Her body was shutting down from exhaustion, dehydration, and infection. By day 6, Julianne was delirious. She was hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. The stream had become a river now, wider and faster. She could barely walk, so she started floating, using a log for support, letting the current carry her downstream. Days 7, 8, and 9 blurred together. She doesn't remember much from that time. Just endless water, endless trees, endless pain. She was starving. Her candy was long gone. She tried to catch fish with her hands but was too weak. She ate nothing. On day 10, something changed. She heard a sound, a mechanical sound, the distinct buzz of a motorboat engine. Julianne tried to scream, but her voice was barely a whisper. The sound faded. She had missed her chance. But the motorboat meant something crucial. She was getting close to civilization. That night, she slept on a sandbank, too exhausted to go any further. She had given everything she had. If help didn't come soon, this would be where her journey ended. On the morning of January 3, 1972, 11 days after the crash, Julianne Kupka saw something that made her weep with joy. A boat. A real boat, tied to a riverbank, and next to it, a small shelter, a hut used by local lumberjacks. Using the last of her strength, Julianne crawled up the muddy bank. The hut was empty, but inside she found supplies. There was a small motor, some fuel, and most importantly, she remembered something her father had taught her about treating wounds in the jungle. With shaking hands, she poured gasoline directly into the gash in her arm. The pain was excruciating. She screamed. But then something miraculous happened. The maggots began crawling out of the wound. She counted them. 35 maggots, 35 parasites that had been eating her alive. Exhausted and in agony, Julianne lay down on the wooden floor of the hut and waited. If the owners came back, she would be saved. If they didn't, well, at least she'd made it this far. Hours later, as the sun began to set, she heard voices. 3 Peruvian forestry workers, local lumberjacks, were returning to their camp. They approached the hut, laughing and talking, when they saw her lying on the floor. At first, they thought she was a river spirit, a water demon. Her skin was pale, her blonde hair was matted with mud and blood, her dress was shredded, and she looked more dead than alive. The men were terrified. But then Julianne spoke. In broken Spanish, she told them about the plane crash, about falling from the sky, about walking for 11 days through the jungle. The men were shocked. They had heard about the crash, everyone in Peru had, but they never expected to find a survivor, especially not a teenage girl who had somehow walked out of the jungle alone. They immediately gave her water and food, but gently, because they could see she was severely malnourished. They cleaned her wounds properly. They gave her a place to rest. The next morning, the lumberjacks took Julianne downstream by canoe, a journey that lasted 7 hours. She watched the jungle pass by, the same jungle that had been her enemy and her protector for nearly 2 weeks. When they finally reached the town of Tornavista, news of her survival had already spread. A local pilot immediately offered to fly her to Pucallpa, where a hospital was waiting. But Julianne insisted on doing something first. She wanted to help with the rescue efforts. She wanted to find her mother. When Julianne arrived in Pucallpa, the entire city stopped. Crowds gathered, reporters swarmed. The girl who fell from the sky had become front-page news around the world. But for Julianne, the real pain was just beginning. Her father, Hans Wilhelm, rushed to the hospital. When he saw his daughter, battered, broken, but alive, he collapsed in tears. But the question that haunted them both was, where was Maria? Using Julianne's descriptions, rescue teams located the main crash site. What they found was devastating. The plane had disintegrated completely. Bodies were scattered across miles of jungle. Many were still strapped into their seats, suspended high in the trees. And then, on January 12th, they found Maria Kupska. She had survived the initial crash. Her body was found still buckled into her seat, but she had died from her injuries while waiting for rescue that never came. 14 other passengers had also survived the fall, only to perish in the days that followed. Julianne had been the only one to walk away. For years afterward, Julianne struggled with survivor's guilt. Why had she lived when 91 others died? Why had her mother, who was sitting right next to her, not made it? These questions tormented her. She developed a severe fear of flying and suffered from recurring nightmares. But Julianne Kupka was a survivor in every sense of the word. She didn't let the tragedy destroy her. She returned to Germany, where she studied biology at the University of Kiel, following in her parents' footsteps. She earned her doctorate and eventually returned to Peru, back to the Amazon, back to Panguana, the research station her parents had founded. Today, Dr. Julianne Kupka is a renowned zoologist specializing in bats. She continues her parents' work, studying the very jungle that nearly killed her, but ultimately saved her life. In 1998, she met with Werner Herzog, a filmmaker who had been scheduled to be on the same flight but changed his plans at the last minute. Together, they made a documentary called Wings of Hope, where Julianne returned to the crash site for the first time. Standing in that jungle again, she reflected on what those 11 days taught her. I had grown up knowing that nothing is impossible in the rainforest. The jungle is as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. So what can we learn from Julianne Kupka's story? First, knowledge saves lives. The survival skills her parents taught her, how to find water, how to navigate the jungle, how to identify danger, These weren't just interesting facts. They were the difference between life and death. Second, the human body and spirit are capable of far more than we think. Julianne endured injuries that would hospitalize most people, then walked for 11 days through one of the harshest environments on Earth. She never gave up. And finally, sometimes survival is just about taking the next step. Not thinking about the whole journey, not being overwhelmed by how far you have to go. Just one step, then another, then another. Julianne fell 2 miles from the sky and lived to tell about it. She walked through hell and came out the other side. Her story is a testament to human resilience, the power of knowledge, and the unbreakable will to survive. If you found this story as incredible as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true survival stories that will blow your mind. Drop a comment below telling me, could you have survived what Julianne went through? And remember, no matter what you're going through right now, you're tougher than you think. If a 17-year-old girl can survive the impossible, you can handle whatever life throws at you. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and never stop surviving.